Hey everyone, I'm Albert from the AUDL, and I'm here to give you tips and tricks on delivering a speech. In general, this is going to be focused at the Speech Bowl, but you can use these tips on any other speech that you give throughout your career. So the very first thing is that we have to cover the basics. And from the start, practice makes perfect. After you say a sentence 5 times in a row, you'll find out that you will have it memorized and it'll just be etched in your brain for a period of time. So you really have to just practice, practice, practice. You have to make sure that practice, secondly, is out loud. That when you practice, the best way to memorize it is to actually hear yourself say it, and then while you hear yourself say it, you can also nail down the pronunciation of hard words beforehand, and you can work out challenging sentences so you know how they flow. So you can know where to pause, what words to emphasize, and the pronunciation of hard words. Speaking to a wall, as it says on this slide, is that speaking to a wall actually does help. So if you ever go to an in-person competition, if you're lucky, um, you'll get to see a lot of people speaking to a wall in speech events. And that sort of thing is because they're trying to practice and rehearse themselves so they know what they're saying inside of their speech. And the wall doesn't judge you. So that's a benefit for speaking in front of a wall instead of other people. After you cover the basics, the main thing here is that you just need to keep on practicing. And if you practice a speech so many times, you will have it memorized if you need to have it memorized. But how do you engage your audience and how do you make a delivery interesting to people? And I think there's really three components of making a speech interesting. And the first is eye contact. The second is vocal expressiveness. And the last is body language. So we're going to cover these. First, when it comes to maintaining eye contact, don't stare at a script. I know that this is going to be really tricky for a lot of you, but if it is scripted, the best things to do would either be one, memorize it. And this comes with a lot of practice that you have to say those sentences over and over again. What I did when I was a competitor is that if I ever needed to memorize a speech, I would say this sentence out loud multiple times until I knew it memorized. And then I would go on to the next sentence. And then I would do the same for that sentence. And then I would combine the two together and see if I could memorize the whole thing. And if I didn't get it down, I would just restart and just try to memorize it. And I would work my way through every single paragraph that way. And then at the end, I would do it paragraph by paragraph. And after I get all the paragraphs memorized, I would combine it into one large speech. And that's really the only way you can memorize a speech. The other way that you can do now that we're in a virtual setting is that you can put it inside of your peripheral vision. And so this is a lot of things that musicians do, is that they have to like stare at a conductor while they also read some sheet music. So this is a trick that you usually just stare at the camera like I'm doing right now, but you're actually reading the bottom of the slide that I am. And so this is actually what's utilized in a lot of presidential speeches, and most speeches that you see on like any sort of news channel is that they use teleprompters, which are some sort of like words behind a camera, and they just read right off of that. This can look rather awkward, however, so I would best advise you, if you can, to memorize your speeches for the Speech Bowl. Another tip for maintaining eye contact is don't zone out at the wall. Don't stare behind in the vast nothingness or at the cream colored wall behind you. In the end, that's going to make you lose track of where you are in your speech. And also, it makes you look unattentive to your judges. What you want to do when you maintain eye contact is you want to establish an individual connection with every single member of your audience. So if there's 3 judges in your audience, you want to make sure that you give each one of them eye contact. And this is established when you see them nodding along at something that you say in your speech, or maybe going like, or like they'll have like some sort of facial expression that shows that they are engaged inside of your speech. And lastly, connect with your judge. This has to do with the last bullet point as well, but you want to make sure that you actually have that sort of expressive connection with your judge, that you know that your judge is on the same level as you. When it comes to vocal expressions, there's 3 main portions of having great vocal expressions in your speech. The first one, pace yourself. So don't rush through your speech. This is something that I always did in my novice year, that I just rushed through my speech and I would have so much time left over because I just didn't take the time to pause at important spots. And that sort of thing can be avoided, one again, if you practice your speech and time your speech. And those will help you pace yourself through the speech, and it'll help you highlight what's important so you don't also slur your words And you should be reading your speech like some sort of bedtime story. You should be reading it like you want the audience to be as engaged as possible. You want to be like, Red Little Riding Hood went over the hill and went to her grandma, but all of a sudden there was a bear. You want to emphasize and pace yourself so you have climaxes in your speech and climaxes inside of your vocal expressiveness. That leads to the second part, which is emphasizing important words or important phrases. So if you ever come across something that's really important in your speech, such as if you proceed with the affirmative plan, this is going to lead to extinction. That's something that you want to emphasize. And emphasizing important words can be done either through tonality, which we'll cover next, or you can slow down on it, and which is pacing. Both of those are great ways that you can emphasize important phrases, words, or facts that you have inside of your speech. And last, inside of emphasis, don't shout all of the time. If you're shouting all the time, it tends to just overload your judge, and your judge will just feel like they're just like being blown out of their minds in a bad way. You want to blow them out of their minds in a good way. So save the emphasis for things that are important. And lastly, for vocal expressives, you want to watch your tone. A lot of mistakes in the freshman year, especially when you're just reading off of a case, is that you end up being really monotone. And what this means is that you just say sentences at a blank level like a robot, kind of like that, except for less stressed. What we have to do when you watch your tone is that you want to speak like you're in a normal conversation and you're having a professional type of relationship with your judge and your audience. So what you want to do inside of tonality is that you want to be able to inflect your voice to emphasize certain words, phrases, or facts that are important to you and you want to stress to your judge. And lastly, when it comes to body language, this is going to be a little tricky now that we're all virtual and online. But the first thing that you should watch for now that we're online is everything face up. So facial expressions, some things that you should just absolutely not do. Don't wince. Don't wincing is also a thing that you shouldn't do when your opponents are speaking. If you ever see your opponent's speech, that you always want to be as respectful as possible. You don't want to give anybody side eye. You always want to stare at everyone directly, and you never want to zone out. So zoning out, it can be easy sometimes if you're uninterested, but you always want to maintain the maximal level of attention. Um, what you want to do with your face is you want to smile when it's appropriate. If you're saying something that's like, I'm going to save the world, that's something that you should be smiling or passionate about. And on the flip side, if you're talking about a serious issue that you're also passionate about, you want to maintain your serious level of facial expression. In the end, just watch what your face is doing because that's all we're seeing on a virtual setting. The other thing that you should be watching on a virtual setting is what you're doing with this upper body portion that's still exposed on the camera. Some things to watch out for is that you shouldn't be shrugging all the time or like bouncing back and forth on a chair or anything. What you want to do is you want to stay steady as possible. And what I found helps before me for a lot of my speeches, especially if I was nervous before giving the speech, was just doing like a deep breathing exercise or doing something like ridiculously embarrassing on the other hand, like a vocal exercise where you just like it really helps some people. In person, there's a lot more to watch for. The first thing to watch for if you're ever going to be in person is your hands. There's a lot of things that you can do with your hands, but it gets kind of advanced. You'll find what works for you in the end, but the main tips are to use both of your hands. If it looks ridiculous with both of your hands, then don't do it. Keep all your gestures above your waistline. Otherwise, you're guiding your opponent or you're guiding your judge's attention too low. You want to guide them right to your face so you can attract their eyes and then engage them inside of that speech. And then something else, the only exception to the two-hand rule is that you can do numbers. Like if you just want to be like, my first argument is, and then move on, you can do that with one hand, but that's the only thing that I've learned that looks non-awkward with one hand. Don't go crazy on the hand gestures. And it can be tempting, but you don't want to be giving your speech and be like, it's slightly distracting and it doesn't help to your speech. You want to maximize your hand gestures to help your speech. And the last thing to watch in person is your lower body. A lot of people in real in real person, wow, I have not been in real person in a while, is that they actually tend to sway back and forth like a metronome, or they're on like a ship. And this is something that you want to avoid, that you want to plant your feet as steady as possible and only stand intentionally. A lot of people sway back and forth to establish a rhythm, and it's rather distracting for judges, as you can tell. So stand as still as possible and plant those feet. Just know where you are standing. And this again is going to be helpful if you ever practice giving your speech in front of a wall. You want to give your speech standing in front of a wall to know what your body is doing, and especially in front of a mirror if it really helps. You want to know what facial expressions you're making. You want to see what your hand gestures look like inside of a mirror. And that will help you with maximizing your delivery and making it as engaging as possible. So to recap, you should be watching for three main things when it comes to your delivery: your eye contact to engage the audience, your vocal expressiveness, and lastly, your body language. Hopefully that was helpful.